Alamo Bar, home to lovers of community, Robert Burns, Western cowboys, the chasers of dreams, buddies of the Alamo Bar, Paisley, Scotland, and their love and their dreams that took them to the Alamo Shrine, San Antonio, Texas, US of A. Cowboys, cowboy pictures, generations of people all over the world, especially children, thrilled to the staple of the Western. The lonesome cowboy with no friends but his horse. The cattle spread out as far as the eye could see. The chase that allowed boys and girls to jump up and down, cheering the goodie and booing the baddie. Admissions to the cinema had reached a staggering 1 billion admissions. The Western ruled supreme.
By the time you get to the classic Westerns, you have so many different ideas about escape, adventure, law, right and wrong, all being boiled down into a very, very tight storyline.
Well, I can go back to the black and white stuff. You know, I remember Roy Rogers. That was used to be the Miners on a Saturday.
I think everybody in the west coast of Scotland was a fan of the cowboys. I was always played an Indian. You know, my sister stole my mother's face paint and painted me up as an Indian. You know.
Cowboy films had, in many ways, a blueprint that was already pre-existing before cinema came along. There were novels such as Last of the Mohicans, which was kind of in some ways predated by Walter Scott's novels, the romantic novels setting the wilderness. And so what happened is with Western movies is that they built upon what was already there.
The Western was becoming more and more complex. Clint Eastwood's The Unforgiven actually dealt with the angst of killing a baddie, something that would not be seen in the basic, simple black versus white, good versus evil of the simple morality tales of the old Westerns.
I think the movies added to the myth in many ways, built on what was already going on.
Through the Western, we learned a lot about the history of America. The Battle of Wounded Knee, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and of course, the Alamo. The Alamo Bar is at first glance what is called in the west of Scotland a wee Jimmy pub. That means the pub is traditional, it has no pretensions, and that the customers really do know everybody else's name. One quick look around this Alamo Bar tells you that there is something else going on here.
Well, it was, I think Mr. Chadwick, or Chaddy as they call him in the bar, has added bits and pieces over the period. No, I like to name, put it that way, but I like the characters in the pub.
But everybody just congregates in the bar, and you're always made very welcome.
That was something you come in here and you see, who's that up on the wall? That didn't look like the Geronimo that was in the pictures, but that's the real Geronimo.
It's all of the same kind of ilk that's drawn to this place. So yes, the Alamo facilitates, encourages and spreads its wings wide across the world, in fact, which is an amazing thing.
My wife took over here October '92. It was called the Alamo, but there was nothing to ascertain any history of the name or the Alamo in San Antonio. Now, I was always interested in the West and the history of the West. Why should we not start putting a bit of history into the place? And it just so happened that there was a gentleman from Alaska. So he was talking about it, and I said, right. I said, well, we'll start with try and get some flags.
You know, and the flags up. So that, you start to get an interest, you know, and more flags start to appear, you know. You say, where is that, and where is that, and you know, and they give you an interest.
So it's about people coming in here, feeling the place and enjoying it, and saying, maybe I want to be part of this. I'm going to send them this. I'll give them this.
I would say that the Alamo Bar has always, since Mr. Chadwick took over anyway, has always been concerned about its place in history, the history of the American, not just the Alamo, but as I said before, American natives.
I am blood brother to my blood sister of the Quahadi Comanche, a band of Comanche called the Quahadi, who are the Antelope people. That came about when two ladies came in here one Saturday night, and she and her dad came from the reservation in Oklahoma, the Comanche reservation. You see, and I just happened to say to her, that's one of my aims in life is to be made a blood brother. But as I said, I want to show you what I call my museum to the Native American. So you know I'm not just speaking with forked tongue. And I showed her the artifacts of the Native American. And I explained to her my feelings. She said, well, we'll have to go somewhere where my feet must touch Mother Earth. So we went out the back garden. You can have only 2 witnesses, but no cameras and no talking, because this is spiritual. She narrated this ritual for about 10 minutes. She chanted, and let's kind of shuffle and dance type. And after that was finished, after about 10 minutes, she was crying. And I said, well, why are you crying? She says, it's emotional for me. She says, why? She says, you're my blood brother. She says, my real brother, he committed suicide just over a year ago. So you're taking his place spiritually. And your name is now Chukwa Power. And I said, well, what does that mean? She says, Brother Moon. And I said, well, what's your name? She says, Mua Power, meaning crying moon. She says, we may never meet again, but if you ever want to talk to me, you speak to the wind. The wind will carry your words right over to me. So that's what we'll make sure if anybody donates into the Alamo, it's shown. That's a painting of Robert Burns that's brought to us or sent to us by Sam Caldwell, Texas State Artist 2004.
What is a portrait of Robert Burns doing amongst all this homage to the Alamo?
The owner at the time, you know, says, why don't you use here? And they had a Burns supper.
There's a Burns night down at the Alamo. The back room lies in wait, and at the bar, active members stand side by side with counterparts, waiting for Uskevar, a drop of the crater, classic cigars, Rizzler papers. But nae fond kiss is fun in here. The brave shuffle tiles, snake eyes down, and fae the walls, fenced in frames, American natives, forgotten names, view this scene of living heroes, forking tongues and puffball egos, and Rabbie's toughs, the blazer crew, quaff their hoffs and move on through, under flags of every hue, Lone Star, Bonnie Blue, the rising sun, Mexico's new, and grey coats drip the evening's weather, and sitting ducks clubbed together, when bikers stroll with heads held low to book a reservation. Wild Bill serves at his bar with facts and dates of every war or battle fought in the land of opportunity. Community spirit, water of life, Friday night numbing, weekday strife, and whilst Billy charms with soothing chat, knowing men are men for all that, through the hub and singing low, someone remembers the Alamo.
Robert Burns, poet of international fame and renown. It is probable that his works were taken over the Atlantic by the early Scottish settlers, and we know that they made their way into the Alamo itself. When the emerging middle classes came out of the period post the Revolutionary War, they too took up Burns. Frank Lebby Staunton, James Russell Lowe, all saluted Burns. Abraham Lincoln even toasted him. James Russell Lowe wrote his famous poem, Incident in a Railroad Car, in which rough and rude men are hypnotised by tales of Burns' life and his poetry on a long train journey.
He spoke of Burns, men rude and rough, pressed round to hear the praise of one whose heart was made of manly, simple stuff, as homespun as their own. It was a sight for sin and wrong and slavish tyranny to see a sight to make our flesh more pure and strong in high humanity.
Old Alloway Kirk, the setting for Tam O'Shanter. You can bet your bottom dollar that Davy Crockett knew Tam O'Shanter, as perhaps Jim Bowie did, and the other 30-odd Scots that were part of the heroes of the Alamo. The tunes Davy Crockett played on his fiddle to raise morale were Scots tunes. And we know that Piper John McGregor blew his lungs out to try and raise morale of the beleaguered garrison. Burns was truly an influence on these men. General Sam Houston, whose origins are here in Houston, Scotland, always carried a book of Burns poetry in his pocket. His own poem, Texas, nods to Burns. Women is lovely to the sight, as gentle as the dews of everywhere, as bright as morning's early light, and spotless in the snows of heaven.
Fact has got his name on it, you know. But it,
Walk over and have a wee look at this.
but it's probably the best statue to Burns in the world. There is a copy in Sydney, and there's a copy in tell a lie, Auckland, New Zealand, and Melbourne, Australia.
Right. Do you believe that story about the green grow their ashes of?
Yes, I do. I have got an idea that that's where it came from, because I've researched it as well, and they can't come up with anything in Spanish or Hispanic that gringo. They called us gringos, but there's no, it doesn't mean white man or anything like that. You know, it's probably, that would have been a popular song at the time. No, green grow their ashes off.
Anybody's welcome, first of all. In the community, they can get a lot of history of the West, the Native American, the Civil War, in here. And my door's always open for them.
You must be quite proud to see this Alamo story being carried into places like the Star Project.
We worked together in this community here. March the 6th, 1836 was the Battle of the Alamo, lasting 13 days. And at the end of it, there were no combatants survived, because Santa Anna said, surrender and everything's okay. If you don't surrender, it's a degueo, which of course means no quarter. So of course they didn't surrender, and Generalissimo Antonio Lopez de Santana ordered the degueo to be sounded, and the red flag was hoisted up above San Fernando Cathedral, and the boys in the Alamo knew that was it. No survivors. Green Grow Their Ashes O could have been sung, because there was a night, the last night of the Alamo, McGregor with the bagpipes and Davy Crockett with the fiddle. And of course there were a lot of Scots songs.
So I think there's a lot of family ties between Scotland and America, and a lot of cultural ties. So a lot of the culture that Scottish people had would have been exported to America with them. So that culture then comes back in the popular culture of America. So in the cowboy movies, you know, you have a lot of folk music, you have a lot of drinking of whiskey, you know, a lot of singing and a lot of bonhomie and you know, good times, which I think, you know, is also a sort of kind of a Scottish, you know, in many ways a Scottish kind of thing.
I've always been into that, as I said, I've always been interested in the West, the Native American, the American Civil War, and of course the Battle of the Alamo is an epic in American history. And with a number, of course, there were a number of Scots that died there. But it was just, the Alamo's here, and we're building this up, what I call this is the Scottish Alamo. So I said, wait a minute, there's two Alamos, one in San Antonio and the other one in Paisley. I says, I'd love to, and I always wanted to go and see it, just to stand at their gates and just to look and say, I've been there.
We used to do the horses, and there were 6 of us at a time, and we put £10 each in, 4 of us picked a horse each. So we're kind of winning dribs and drabs, and eventually I said, right, we'll have a meeting. We'll put half the money into premium bonds, and we'll just use the 30 for the bet, which we started doing. So you can imagine after a few years, the money was going up. We never won the million in the premium bonds, so it had become the talking point. So we had a meeting in the lounge and said, what we do? We go to Tenerife, we go to Spain, and out of the blue, I can't remember who mentioned it, somebody mentioned, what about the Alamo in San Antonio? And that was a spark. So we made all the arrangements and we went to the Alamo.
Well, when we go over there, although it's a holiday, we actually do talk about Paisley, we talk about Scotland, and the gifts we take over are from Paisley.
I would love for them to come over because of the links that they have with their ambassadors from the Alamo Bar.
Although it's a holiday, it's like a kind of trade mission, you know, because they give us, like the mayor's office give us, they give us presents for the Paisley Council. The Paisley Council give us presents for the council in San Antonio. So it's like a trade mission.
And to the people in San Antonio and to their mayor, I hope you enjoyed the little bottle of whiskey. Maybe we'll send him a bigger one the next time.
We correspond every year with the Daughters of the Republic of Texas. Melinda Navarro, administrator. Michael Dutton, he's also a day-to-day administrator. And El Comandante, Ellen Thompson. As I say, we're friends now because that's four times now we've met them, and every time we go over there, we presents, they give us presents. So it's like going over to see friends now.
Here in the Alamo Bar, we've learned of a man with a dream. We've learned of a man with a bunch of buddies who helped him achieve that dream. We've learned of a bunch of people who have taken the values of the Alamo and spread them locally to the community and indeed internationally, to the point where people visit this small pub from all over the world. One thing's a certainty: when they visit here and they leave, they will remember the Alamo.
When I saw it for the first time, it was about 8:30 in the morning, and the boys, when we woke up in the Travel Lodge in San Antonio, says, right, what's the first thing? He says, right, we saw the Alamo last night. Come on, we'll show you where it is. You know, so at 8:30 in the morning, we're walking along the streets, and then they didn't say it. They said, right, turn left now. So we turned left into the Alamo Plaza. And there it was, and you kind of missed at that time in the morning, and they were just sitting there, and there was a wee bit of kind of rain on the ground water on the ground because it had been raining the night before, a big thunderstorm. And I've got to be truthful, I just went down on my knees and said a wee prayer and said, thank God I've made it.